Дорогие друзья, мы начинаем нашу встречу. Сегодня у нас очень интересная встреча. У нас в гостях люди известные, люди легендарные, гости с другого полушария, профессор Принстонского и Нью-Йоркского университетов Стивен Коэн. Супруга господина Коэна, главный редактор журнала Катрина ванден Хювел. Ну, я также представлю всех, кто сидит за столом в президиуме, потому что все люди имеют так или иначе отношение к сегодняшнему мероприятию, к приглашению наших гостей. Профессор социологического факультета Леонид Николаевич Доброхотов. Профессор Московской школы экономики МГУ Виктор Борисович Кувалдин. Глава фонда Рузвельта исторического факультета Юрий Николаевич Рогулев. Заместитель декана по международному сотрудничеству исторического факультета Ольга Евгеньевна Казьмина. Президент Ассоциации исследователей российского общества 21 века Геннадий Аркадьевич Бардюгов. Вот, ну, я замдекана по науке Дмитрий Андреев. Я просто хочу... Спасибо. Поскольку у нас сегодня в центре беседы, главная тема беседы — это Соединенные Штаты и Россия, отношения между нашими странами. Поэтому закономерно будет, что это мероприятие будет вести ведущий американист факультета Юрий Николаевич Рогулев. Пожалуйста. Ну, можно оттуда, можно отсюда.
Как вам удобно. Уважаемые друзья, мы рады всех здесь приветствовать. Ну, для нас действительно это такой день особенный. Не так часто у нас теперь бывают гости из Соединенных Штатов. Тем более гости такие. Вы знаете, когда, я не знаю, слышали ли выступление когда-нибудь нашего лектора Садовничева, вот он, когда выступает, обращается к аудитории, он обычно говорит «люди Московского университета», «people of the Moscow University». А дальше у него две другие категории. Друзья Московского университета и все остальные люди. Вот так он на три группы делит. Вот мы сегодня имеем честь здесь с вами встретиться с двумя друзьями Московского университета. Это профессор Стивен Коэн, которого, ну, наверное, который не нуждается здесь в представлении. Он часто появляется у нас на экранах, часто выступает. Ну, я помню, я уже не такой молодой человек, помню, в более ранние годы Стив выступал и перед широкой аудиторией, по-моему, с Красной площади, перед большими собраниями. Это был период перестройки, да? Перестройки чуть позже. Так что вот здесь частый гость, работы его известные, они опубликованы на русском языке. Ну и супруга его Катрины ванден Хювел, она известный общественный деятель в Соединенных Штатах, редактор журнала один из старейших журналов, выходит он в Нью-Йорке. Ну, о направлении журнала она сама расскажет. Я думаю, что мы, чтобы не занимать долго время, построим нашу встречу таким образом. Мы предоставим слово Стиву Коэну для такого вступительного слова, затем Катрине, и после этого вопросы, обсуждения и все тут дискуссии мы будем считать уже тогда открытой. Согласны с такой процедурой? Все, тогда, Стив, вам слово, пожалуйста.
Это микрофон работает?
Работает, да.
Это не надо, да?
Это да.
Свет. Говорили мне, что все вы говорят по-английски гораздо лучше, чем мы говорим по-русски. Это так? Так? Покажите. Конечно, это не очень высокий уровень, лучше, чем мы говорим по-русски. Ну хорошо, можно на английский? Точно? Нет, да. Да? Окей.
Нет, да.
Нет, да. So, мы с женой, это сочетание, are very happy to be here again at MGO. Being, as I am, much older than you, I remember MGU from the years of Brezhnev when I lived in Moscow. And even then, it was a magical university to me. I was never a student here or an aspirant here, but so many of my friends studied here. It was a wonderful place, and I'm sure it still is. We were here 3 years ago, and I spoke for about 10, 20 minutes, and I had very bad news. And today, 3 years later, the news is even more bad, worse. I have been saying this in America for more than 10 years, and no one listens. But I hope you will consider my thesis. We at the Znaczek America USA, we are in a new Cold War. That's without a doubt. But даже хуже, I think that the new Cold War is more dangerous than was the Cold War that my generation and the generation of Katya survived. That this is more dangerous. No one in America wants to hear this. They just do not want to hear it. It is very difficult to get American television or mainstream newspapers to publish this analysis. They just do not want to hear it. Why that's so is a separate question. So let me tell you briefly why I think this new Cold War, which you, your generation, will now have to deal with and survive, is more dangerous. I published an article in June where I gave 10 reasons, 10 ways that the new Cold War is more dangerous. And this article is published in my Izbranaya, which has just been published. But you don't have to buy that because it was translated in June of this year, приблизительно 7 июня, at the site of Inosme in Russia. So it's still there. I'm only going to mention 5, the main reasons why I think the new Cold War is more dangerous today. And then, because I'm more interested in your opinion than my own vystuplenia, I hope we'll have a discussion. Because you may see and understand things that I do not. Reason 1, and this is evident, it's geopolitical. The political center of the last Cold War was in Berlin, correct? The Berlin Wall. That was the dividing point, the Raskol. Today, it is on your borders, on Russia's borders. The political center of the new Cold War is in the Pribaltica, where NATO is building up. It's in Ukraine, and время от времени в Грузии. Так? Это очень опасно. You can imagine the military dangers. And we see it today with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in the area of Kerch and Mariupol. We see this. And Washington supports Ukraine, Kiev. This is extremely dangerous. Second, during the first Cold War, the last Cold War, we had permanent cooperation along with conflict in the form of nuclear arms negotiations, correct? They were постоянно. Today, they almost do not exist. In 2002, President Bush left the anti-ballistic missile treaty, right? That was extremely important for your country, but also for ours. And now President Trump says he's going to leave the intermediate range missile treaty that Gorbachev and Reagan signed more than 30 years ago. That's extremely dangerous. So instead of negotiations, we're having the death of negotiations, of what was achieved. If this continues, there will be a new and more dangerous nuclear arms race, maybe even in outer space. So this is new and even more dangerous. Third, this is very important. During Soviet times, even though officially in America, our leaders were against your Soviet communist leaders, officially, they accepted them as legitimate partners in negotiation. Khrushchev, Brezhnev, и так далее, и особенно Gorbachev, но не только. So no one in America thought that it was not correct to negotiate with Brezhnev, even though he was a Soviet communist leader. Today, because of the demonization of Putin, you understand the word demonization? Это понятно. Вы не можете представить это в Америке. Как это, Леонид?
Демонизация.
Demonization of Putin в Америке. There is the opinion, very widespread, among our elite, that Putin is not a legitimate partner for negotiations. So you look at me and think I'm crazy, that this is not possible. But just remember what happened when Trump came home from Helsinki. Была встреча с Путиным там, да? Когда-то было, июля. When Trump got home, they said this was предательство, that he met with Putin. Предательство. So if this is предательство, how can there be negotiations? We didn't have this situation during the preceding Cold War. Fourth, and closely related, you know the word Russiagate? Это слово существует у вас. Russiagate. Понятно, полно понятно. Это глупость, конечно. Сплошная глупость. Но это фактор, реальная, конкретная фактор в американской политике сегодня. What does this mean? This means that Trump, our president, ну, нравится или не нравится, это не имеет значения. He, our elite, thinks he is not legitimate, that he cannot represent American interests when he talks with Putin. So if Putin is not legitimate and Trump is not legitimate, how do we negotiate? How do we negotiate? What if? Now, Premier, you all remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. Как это по-русски, Cuban Missile Crisis?
Кубинский ракетный кризис.
You know what that was.
62
We came that close to nuclear war, correct? Yeah? And we were supposed to learn the lesson that we would always negotiate. What if today there is something like the Cuban Missile Crisis? Where may that be? Syria, Прибалтика, Ukraine. Это полно возможно. If the two leaders are not considered legitimate in the United States, how will we avoid nuclear war? Where will there be a Khrushchev and a Kennedy to end the crisis? This worries me every day. Finally, my last point. And because of my age, I know this, I participated. This is not from the study of history. In the 1970s and the 1980s, in the United States, there was a very strong opposition to the Cold War. And it existed at the highest levels. There were even people in the White House, in the State Department, right, Leonid, you remember, in the media. There was always an opposition, so we had a struggle, a political struggle. Today, there is zero, zilch, сплошное отсутствие opposition to the new Cold War. So this is really dangerous. So I leave you with this thought, and maybe I exaggerate. I think that relations between our countries today is отношения между нашими странами, более опасны сегодня, чем any other time in history. And no one pays attention. And we have to think about what we can do. I think it's mainly our problem, our fault. But Russia has to play a role too. And what we do, I am not sure. That's bad news, by the way.
Разрешите предоставить слово Катрине ванден Хювел.
Good evening. Slishna, I want to thank Yuri Rogalov for his leadership in reminding Russia of the leadership of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. When you think of leaders in America, I think of Roosevelt as one of the great leaders of the 20th century. He recognized Russia in 1933. That was another Cold War, and his wife Eleanor was an extraordinary partner in making America a more just and democratic country. Today, as Steve said, we gather at a very dangerous moment. Several decades after the end of the Soviet Union, our countries are in a new Cold War. And that is a grave failure, I would submit, of representative democracy, which is what Roosevelt championed, what America at its best should be. There was scarcely a public word of debate, much less opposition, as Steve said, from the American political and media establishment as this new Cold War unfolded. And I would date it, Steve, from 2014, the new Cold War from 2014. As Steve said, the epicenter of the conflict in different parts, but in Ukraine for sure. I would also say that no modern precedent exists for the complicity, involvement of the political media establishment in America at this fateful turning point. As you may know, considerable congressional and media debate, even protest, were voiced in the run-up, for example, to the war in Iraq in 2003. Or during the Vietnam War, there were divisions in America between the elite and there were people protesting, and the media was filled with debate. But today, this Cold War, as Steve said, unfolds amid inflammatory American and Russian misinformation, and Ukrainian. And it unfolds, as Steve also said, without the stabilizing practices that prevented conflict in the previous Cold Wars. In that sense, we are in a new arms race, a Cold War arms race, without really any stabilizing factors. And yet all of this has come with virtually unanimous bipartisan. You understand, in America, we're a poor country. We have only two main parties, Democratic and Republican. But both parties, for the most part, have decided that it is the conflict with Russia and China, to a certain extent, that will define America. And this is very dangerous. It's the mainstream media in America. There's a lot of talk about freedom of press, freedom of speech, but the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and even, I'm sad to report, the liberal media, with the exception of my magazine, The Nation, have really bought in, you know the expression, have bought in and support this new Cold War. So much of it, I have to say, is the demonization Putina. It's as if there's only one person who lives in Russia, Putin. It's always Putin, 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 and Russia, and I covered Russia in the Gorbachev years, in the Yeltsin years. There are many possibilities of coverage, from the rise of the Russian Orthodox Church or the municipal elections or what's happening to the provinces. But it's always Putin. So both sides, I would say, have legitimate grievances. Both sides, Russia, America. But does that mean that there's nothing credible to discuss in Moscow's side of the story? That 20 years, and this again is part of American media, there's so little history, that 20 years of NATO's eastward expansion has caused Russia to feel cornered, that the Ukraine crisis was instigated by the West's attempt to smuggle the former Soviet republic into NATO. So these are very dangerous developments, and I worry, as Steve does, that it's late to have that debate. It's late. So I think what's critical at this moment, and it's also, Steve and I disagree sometimes. Steve believes in the power of leaders. I do too. But you also need from below the power of people. That we must call for ratcheting down of military conflict and call for diplomacy and dialogue. And the disregard, as you may know, Russiagate. Russiagate is an obsession in America. The idea that Russia interfered in our election. Maybe Russia did interfere in our election, but that didn't elect Trump. What elected Trump are uniquely American problems. And I think to focus only on Russiagate and interference loses sight of what we need to do to reform America, as Roosevelt did. So the risk of nuclear catastrophe is very dangerous. Do you know the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists? It is a very famous publication and organization which monitors through its doomsday clock the danger of nuclear peril. And it has said that it rates the danger higher today of nuclear peril than when the Soviet Union tested its first nuclear device in 1949. One point which I think is very important for you who come into a new world, Cold War is very bad for democracy. Cold War empowers the military-industrial complex, the war parties, the worst forces on both sides, nationalist fervor. Diplomacy is sidelined. The space for dissent closes. It empowers authoritarianism on both sides. And I worked in the 90s with courageous dissidents, with feminist organizations, with free independent media. I interned at Moscow News in the Glasnost period. Steve and I are very close to Novaya Gazeta, which has lost journalists who are covering muckraking problems. And I think that those who care about democracy need to understand how bad Cold War is. I will give you an example or two in our country. There are good people in Congress. There's a congressman from California named Ro Khanna. When he speaks up against this new Cold War and says we need diplomacy, he is accused of being duped by the Kremlin and Putin's puppet. There is a senator who's a Republican named Rand Paul who visited Moscow a few months ago. When he opposed the acceptance of Montenegro, I believe it was Montenegro, into NATO, he was accused by the late Senator John McCain of being a Putin puppet. To stigmatize people for having different points of view is un-American and I think is dangerous for our debate and our discussion. So arguing that Russia and the United States have a mutual interest in working to resolve conflicts is not popular these days, but it's the only realistic option. Now, to say rebuilding in words Steve didn't use, I think rebuilding détente, it's an old-fashioned word, but it's a needed word, is going to be very difficult. Because I would, Vladimir Putin is, some think he's a Miyake authoritarian. Donald Trump, my magazine, fights Donald Trump every day on a number of issues. But opposition to Donald Trump should not be opposition to common sense. Common sense dictates that Russia and the United States have a working partnership to resolve nuclear issues, to resolve the crisis in Syria, which is destabilizing Europe with the refugee flows. And I think these are the issues we have to confront. Someone once said, we come to negotiations with the governments we have, not with the ones that we wish we had. There is simply no other choice. And I will close by saying we just had an election in America. You may have heard about it. The Democrats won back the House of Representatives. The Republicans continue to control the Senate. It's a much more interesting election than that. Many were elected as governors and in state houses. But the Russia scandal, so to speak, was not an issue. As in this country, I suspect the pension reform is probably more important than, I don't know, a lot of things. And healthcare was the most important issue in our election, not Russiagate. But yet, the day after the election, our elites in the media and in Congress are back, saying this is what we need to investigate. This must be at the top of the agenda. They're not listening to people. A recent poll, do you know Gallup? Gallup poll found that 57% of Americans want a more cooperative relationship with Russia versus 37% who do not. And I think that's very important to build on. In the same way the INF, Steve spoke of the INF, that wasn't passed only because Reagan and Gorbachev decided it was time to abolish an entire class of weapons, though I think Gorbachev was the most committed and radical nuclear abolitionist ever to have power. It was because there were millions of people in the streets in America, in countries around the world, in Europe. It takes from below and it takes from on high. So the bottom line is, your participation is important. Your participation is vital. And don't let anyone, as we are seeing in America, call you a Putin puppet or an American puppet. My husband, every day in America, is attacked because he tries to bring common sense to a discussion about US-Russian relations. He is called Kukul Putina. Just enough, chvatit. And so I want to end by saying, I hope you will go to thenation.com. The Nation is America's oldest weekly. We were founded right after the Civil War in 1865, and our role has always been to offer alternative, dissenting views, to foster, not police, debate, and to counter, in these times, the relentlessly one-sided coverage of Russia. Not because we are pro-Russian, but because we believe in the American value of debate, of different points of view, which is what we should all strive for, debate and discussion. And so I would say that while arguing that both the United States and Russia have a serious interest in maintaining a working relationship, that view may not be popular in America right now, but it is not radical. It is what I would call sober realism. And I don't like, well, sober realism. And I hope that you will read thenation.com. Steve publishes a weekly column there. And it is very good to be with people who I know have many questions about what the hell is going on in America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Even though you mentioned that maybe it's too late to debate, I'm happy to open the debate and to ask the questions to both of our guests. And before you start, I maybe will ask my question. Steve, you mentioned the old code, and it was very ideological in its character. What about ideology in politics today? Doesn't it mean that politics again become much more ideological, at least on the American side? What is your opinion? What is going on in the United States? You know, it's a growing of ideology, and because we see all these political debates which are very sharp. What about this?
What the hell is going on?
I will be more polite.
So the problem is that we are sitting here with two of Russia's leading authorities on American politics, Professor Koenem and Professor Rubin. And they ask us what's going on in America. I think to myself, I should ask them what's going on in America. It is not really entirely a joke. Sometimes people who are outside see inside better than those of us who are inside. So let me just say one thing about what you said. When I began to argue, this was 15 years ago, that there was going to be a new Cold War between Russia and the United States. All the smart people, as we call them, you know, the smart means smart people, the big people, the people who are authoritative, said, Cohen's crazy, he doesn't understand anything. Because when we had the previous Cold War, there was ideological conflict, and there was a conflict between systems, communism, Sovietsky, and American capitalism. Plus, Russia's too weak, and all the conflicts are local, not global. Well, it looks very different today, doesn't it? Because, at least in the United States, I'm not sure what your press is like, there is the big emphasis on what's called Putin's ideology. That it's conservative, reactionary.
Revisionism.
No, I think it's different. It's that what we call politically correct. Вы понимаете смысл выражения политическая корректность, да? So what we say is politically correct, the view in America is Putin's ideology is not politically correct. And maybe this is his attitude toward women, or homosexuals, or anything. So there is an ideological conflict now emerging. Secondly, the conflicts between Washington and Moscow today are not just local. They're in Syria. There's even talk of a new conflict over Cuba. That Russia may play a role in Cuba again. So it's spreading, and above all, it's in Europe. It's all across Europe. So it is interesting what the question raised by Professor Rugelov is what role is ideology going to play? And I conclude, first as a historian, that we exaggerated the role of ideology in the past Cold War. As time went on, it became more and more a traditional great power imperial conflict. And we spoke our ideology, and the Soviet leadership spoke its ideology, but the reality was fairly non-ideological. On the other hand, today, when we say that Russia has capitalism, America has capitalism, I think ideology is starting to play a very strong role. And a lot of this, of course, is a наследствие, is portion of anti-Russian feelings in America, which are, of course, ideological. So I expect within a year or so for this to be fully ideological. Even though a lot of it is associated with Putin, in America, you know how they refer to you in America. Putin's Russia. Putin's Russia. So as Katrina said, the focus on Putin becomes a generalization about Russia. And if they object to Putin's ideology, I'm not sure Putin actually has an ideology, but if he has an ideology, it becomes Russia's ideology. So I think this is where we're headed.
Спасибо большое. Пожалуйста, за ответ. Если кто-то хочет задать вопрос по-русски, пожалуйста, мы поможем, так что не стесняйтесь. Так, пожалуйста.
Thank you very much for the speech. My name is Oleg. I'm a student of history, of Department of History, and I would like to first comment on your thoughts about.
The question.
Yeah, I mean it's close to the question. That's just I would like to explain the reasons for that. You said that now the situation is quite similar to the situation we had during the Cuban crisis, but I think
Could be.
But the problem is that we forget about the crucial fact that there was no annexation at that time, and the crisis was not about some quarreling about name expansion or some human rights issues.
You're speaking about Crimea.
Yes, I'm talking about Crimea case. So we see the situation when the country decides to occupy some territory because of some historical claim to that, even though it's absolutely unrecognizable by the national community right nowadays, and I'm sure it will never be. So doesn't it mean that we have a situation that if we want to have some close relations between two parties, we have to either put up with the fact that this case has happened, or we have to, or the United States, the Western world has to push Russia into some compromise on this particular issue. So that's why when we're talking about, for instance, INF agreement, also, isn't it the situation that China is the country which is nowadays the more important enemy or rival for the United States of America, but China is not part of this agreement. So it means that the United States of America has to somehow restrain itself from having necessary rockets, necessary missiles to protect its allies in the Pacific area, at the same time having to see that China is growing its military capacity. So generally the question is, what do we have to do with the Crimean case? And the second, maybe Russia is too panicking in its behavior towards decline
So that's, everybody understood his 2 points, correct? His English is excellent, so everybody understood, correct? So I have the impression that you think the annexation of Crimea was a mistake. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you also think that the INF question, you know what INF means. It's, I never do, intermediate, it means in plain English, it's medium range ballistic missiles. It's about, I don't forget the kilometers. It's about 300 kilometers to 3,000 kilometers. Yeah?
500 to 5,000.
Miles.
5,500
Kilometers. Okay. So this is, that's right, kilometers less than that. So these are absolutely vital questions. And it depends on how we interpret the situation. China is the easiest for me because it's also impossible. You are absolutely right. China is the country that's developed the most intermediate range missiles. That's what you were talking about. So my position was that in a perfect world, both Trump and Putin would have gone to the Chinese and say, we want to do a new version of this treaty. And of course, you have to join us. That was never attempted. I don't know that. You have any reason to think I'm wrong. It was not attempted. So that would have been my first reaction. And that Trump should have done this. But to say what Trump should do, he should not do, is a little bit strange. But nonetheless, we have to think as rational people. This is a good treaty. It keeps us safe. Those missiles were very dangerous. And what Katrina did in this, well, Victor and really, you remember this, it was the Europeans who wanted those missiles gone.
Western Europeans.
Western Europeans. Because the missiles were based there. And they were very unstable. And they were hard to detect on them. They flew low and fast. They were designed to avoid radar, so they were very destabilized. We don't want those missiles back, but you're right, it's China that has the most. So a diplomatic approach would have been to go to China. And had I been Trump, I would have said, look, Vladimir Vladimirovich, China's your big friend. You go talk to them. We're ready to discuss it. That didn't happen. Crimea. So this is difficult for an American. This is a Russian question, right now. But I will speak as an American historian, without any emotional tie. We were in Crimea for the first time last year. It was my first visit to Crimea. I think that historically, it was both Sluchanist and unstable that Crimea be part of Ukraine. After 1991, после распада, I looked at the historical record. Only Lushkov, as I recall, correct? You remember Lushkov, he was American, and then he wanted to be president, and he and Primakov formed an alliance. Only they talked about returning Crimea to Russia. And there was very little interest at the time, so far as I know.
It was forgotten island.
It was what?
It was forgotten.
Forgotten.
Yes, forgotten.
Okay. So what led to the annexation of Crimea? And we have to ask this question. If there hadn't been the Ukrainian crisis in 2014, I don't know if you agree with me, it would have never, Russia never would have brought Crimea, as Russia says, back home. There was no evidence. Putin showed no interest in it. Maybe I missed it, but I can't find Putin ever saying, "You die, Krim, die." It's not, maybe privately, but I saw it. So this was the result of the crisis in Kiev. Who caused the crisis in Kiev? Was it Russia? It doesn't matter, sure, because we have to ask as historians, it doesn't matter. So we can learn a lesson, how a crisis happens, and what its consequences are. If we don't learn a lesson, we're going to do it again and again and again. So, Crimea, in my reading, was a Russian province, historically. It was okay to be part of Ukraine, and there were ways to arrange dual access or governance, or there were all sorts of solutions if there was conflict. But there was no big conflict until 2014. So what happened was a result of unwise Western policy. The attempt to bring, that was, as Katrina said, it was an attempt to bring Ukraine into NATO. That's what 1914 was. They were very open about it in Washington and in Brussels. If you bring Ukraine into NATO, you bring Crimea into NATO. Can you imagine Crimea in NATO? I mean, Sevastopol, the history. It's just not possible. So it's reckless politics by the West. It never should have happened. And if it hadn't happened, Крым сегодня будет часть Ukraine. But it happened, and it happened because living people made decisions which were bad decisions and unwise. And I'll end by saying, I'm not sure Putin had a choice when the crisis unfolded. I'm not sure. We don't know the secrets of what was going on. So you raise the right question, but I don't know the answer for sure.
Спасибо большое. Пожалуйста.
Thank you very much for your lecture on the problem. I think we can compare McCarthyism and the modern pressure on Donald Trump on top of Russiagate. What do you think? Does Donald Trump have opportunities to mitigate Russophobia in the USA and to mitigate economic sanctions on Russia?
You raise an interesting question. Do we have a new McCarthyism? I see McCarthyism more in the context of vilifying, of stigmatizing those who try to raise questions about U.S.-Russian relations. The problem in America right now is the new Cold War began before Trump, but at the moment, Trump is Putin, Putin is Trump. I don't think Trump faces McCarthyism. I think Trump has a lot of power. He has his Twitter feed. He reaches 50 million people a day without interference by the media. But I do worry about, I mentioned people in Congress who are trying to stand up and say enough, this is not decent, who are called pro-Russian. That to me is a McCarthyism because it's not pro-Russian, it's simply saying we need to have diplomacy, we need to avoid conflict, we need to avoid war. I do think Steve has talked a little bit about this. Our media is closed off, for the most part, to different points of view. That was part of McCarthyism too. One thing that I find part of McCarthyism is that RT, you know RT, right? RT, it was forced to register as a foreign agent earlier this year by our Department of Justice. And to come zerkala, because in Russia, media is forced to register as a foreign agent. There is an interesting attempt now to say, no, RT is a news organization. There is a McCarthyism, you know, the Julian Assange, WikiLeaks. At the moment, he is potentially facing indictment for releasing classified information. If he faces indictment, every media organization, press freedom is under threat because many of the revelations about abuse of power over the last years have been a result of classified information. Have you ever heard of the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam era? Those were stolen papers. So I don't think Trump faces McCarthyism, but I think America is confronting a new kind of McCarthyism where we don't have the debate we deserve, that a real democracy deserves, and that people who try to speak out are stigmatized, and not just attacked,
Спасибо большое, пожалуйста. Давайте вон там галерки предоставим.
Если можно, по-русски.
Да, пожалуйста, по-русски.
В течение последних десятков лет, несколько,
Чуть погромче.
мы видим за последние годы, что у России искренних союзников все меньше и меньше. И на сегодняшний день, можно сказать, практически не осталось. Если не говорить про Беларусь. Как вы думаете, будет ли Россия противостоять Америке и ее союзникам в одиночку, или есть возможность у России, да, вернуть некоторые страны в качестве союзников, которые будут опираться на логику и прагматизм?
Спасибо за вопрос.
Я
Это
не
несколько
совсем-
не к американской, наверное, аудитории, скорее к нашей, но тем не менее.
Я не совсем понимаю вопрос.
The question was that-
Не-не-не, я понимаю вопрос. Я не понимаю понятие за вопрос. То есть вы считаете, что у России нет союзников в мире?
Рустам, если говорить так, Казахстан, я считаю, мы потеряли.
Некоторые считают, что мы Россию потеряли.
Сейчас не буду звать на себя, но вот я считаю так, что ушли, допустим, как показатель, там, молодые, да. Вот. А Украину, по-моему, понятно, что на какой-то период там, мы потеряли. А Польша, Прибалтика, Румыния, вот если Болгария, мы все это видели, все эти события, там, с турецким походом, да, потеряли. То есть нет на кого опереться. Кому еще сюда добавить, да? Поэтому серьезно нас никто не поддерживает.
Россия вернулась к границам 17 века. Но после 17 века был 18, 19, и мы пришли к 20-му, к новым границам. Так что не все еще потеряно.
Да, но то, что вот он говорил в самом начале, да, значит, что границы холодной войны сегодняшней, да, четко по нашим границам. Мне кажется, так и вот означает ли, что нам предстоит все-таки бороться с этой агрессией в одиночку, и если есть шанс вернуть кого-то в свои союзы, в свою команду, да, как вы думаете, кого и как?
Иран, Сирию, Вьетнам, Индию. Это миллиарды людей.
Да, вот. Ну, может быть, вы подсказать.
Нет, да, к вам вопрос.
У нас есть то же самое мнение. У нас есть с Доброходовым, наверное, то же самое мнение. Есть плюсы и минусы, да. А может быть, Россия потеряла союзников, если мы считаем союзников Советского Союза. Но были они добровольными союзниками или нет? А сегодня с Россией 100%, но достаточно. Есть Китай, есть Иран, есть Сирия, есть Вьетнам. И скоро будет побольше, даже может быть Индия, как Индия. Это, как мы говорим, не чаплево, это не ничего, это достаточно, это плохо уже. А что общего между ними? Они анти-НАТО. Согласен с вами? Анти-НАТО. И это очень важный фактор. Я не бы сказал без квалификации, что Россия без союзников. Даже я могу сказать, ну, с условиями, конечно, что есть больше добровольных союзов. Ну, конечно, посмотрим. Это переходный период.
May I add to that? The geopolitical politics of the United States is going to create more allies for Russia. The National Defense Strategy, which was released in January of this year, of the United States, has announced that no longer will the global war on terror or counterinsurgency wars be the main focus of U.S. political attention after having spent $5.6 trillion in the last 17 years on this global war on terror. But the new focus is on conflict with Russia and China. And that is where all the geopolitical focus, the military focus of the United States and money will go. And I think, for better or worse, that will drive the Russia and China closer together if they are the focus of the United States' attention militarily. The sadness I have is that instead of focusing on the real challenges of our time, climate crisis, nuclear proliferation, we are going to spend trillions of dollars in a conflict or a possible conflict with Russia and China. And I would add one last thing. I think Russia, with all of its problems, is playing a good role right now in Afghanistan in trying to broker some negotiated diplomatic resolution of that country's horrific crisis, working with the Taliban, which the United States tried to but lost patience. And in leaving the Iran nuclear deal, the United States set back nuclear non-proliferation efforts by decades, and the climate agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think both countries, Russia and the United States, are not wise at the moment in terms of their geopolitical focus. But it will drive Russia and China, two major powers, certainly China, together, closer, and maybe become allies or at least partners of convenience in the face of U.S. attention.
Вы поняли этот ответ, да?
Да, пожалуйста, давайте. Пусть. Микрофон передать?
Да, точно. Вот, возьмите микрофон, передать это.
Thank you very much.
Вот.
Nowadays, the issue of 4 or 2 Russian islands are being discussed. What do you think? Will it be right for Russia to present islands to Japan? 4 islands. I'm talking about Hawaii and Kashmir.
The New Year gift, you mean?
Yes, like a present. Yes.
Понятно? Полно. Грубо говоря, откуда я знаю? Может быть, у вас есть мнение. Я понимаю, что это очень долговременный вопрос. И, конечно, есть такая возможность из-за отношений между Россией и Японией. Но я не в курсе, просто не совсем. Я не в курсе. Я без знания. Извините.
Thank you. Thank you.
Say one more time the question. Повтори вопрос.
Is it possible that relationship between Russia and America will turn into war actions? Why or why not? Thank you.
Turning into more actions.
War. Можно, Юра, можно микрофон. Есть дефицит микрофонов, да? So, I just published a small book in the United States, and название такое, War with Russia, question mark. And what I've thought about for the last 5 or 6 years is the question you asked. We have to ask, where are we, your country and my country, in soft, cold, potentially hot conflict? Where could Cold War become hot war? Well, until last week, obviously, in Syria, Russians have died in Syria. Shot down by Israeli aircraft, correct? We, the United States, and you, the Russian Air Force, are flying in the same war zone. Now they tell us that we, what's the word? Deconflictization. Ужасное слово. They tell us that your generals and our generals talk every day. Well, what do they talk about? They talk about avoiding war, correct? Well, if you're talking about avoiding war, that means there's a danger of war. Would you agree? So what do they mean? It's very simple. It would be very easy for an American fighter plane to shoot down a Russian fighter plane, or vice versa. So you tell me, what would happen then? I don't know, but I do know that because of the situation in Washington around Trump, because there's this myth that he's Kukla Putin, that he will have to react very strongly. And it would be very easy to slip in war. Now we have the situation around in the sea from Mariupol to Kerch. Washington supports Ukraine. What's Poroshenko going to do now? So one could see that there could be actual fighting between the United States and Russia. And finally, and this worries me a lot, if you look at the NATO building, how to say building, military building.
Военное строительство.
My understanding is, no, not a previous deal, that ordinary artillery, NATO artillery, can strike St. Petersburg without us today.
Сегодня уровень развития артиллерии таков, что можно даже без использования ядерных средств обстрелять Санкт-Петербург американскими средствами войны. Без использования ядерного оружия.
Not the other way, without missiles, just ordinary artillery.
Обычные артиллерийские средства.
So imagine if that was the situation in the United States. That Russian artillery, let's say, on the Canadian border.
Представьте себе, что русские установили бы свои артиллерийские устройства на канадской границе.
And it could strike where I live, New York City.
И могли бы стрелять по Нью-Йорку.
Not missiles, not transatlantic missiles.
Без всяких ракет, просто обычными артиллерийскими снарядами.
This is very dangerous.
Это очень опасно.
Even if, даже если нет намерения. Случайность, это мы узнали из истории, всегда возможно. Случайно. И это значит, я считаю, опасность настоящей войны между нами сегодня существует. Сколько процентов? Я не знаю. Но если это только 5, это уже слишком, по-моему.
Story купить книгу.
Да. Вот здесь употребляется.
Это все. Книга, это уже содержание книги.
Стив, вспоминался здесь журнал ученых-ядерщиков. The Magazine of Atomic Scientists. Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. С часами на здании в Бостоне. Там, по-моему, без 3 минут, 2 минуты до 12 осталось на эти часа. То есть до ядерного конфликта они оставили 2 минуты на этих символических часах на здании журнала американских ученых-ядерщиков.
У нас уже готовый вопрос, но я хочу предложить вам чуть-чуть ускорить наш темп, провести такой блиц. Короткий вопрос, короткий ответ.
Короткий ответ. Да и нет, не может быть.
Не настолько
Есть
короткий.
3 возможности.
Чтобы могли большее количество людей задать вопрос. Пожалуйста.
Okay.
I'm Nelly from Moscow State School of Economics, and
Ближе к микрофону.
Говорите прямо в микрофон. Как
Is
наши
there-
звезды поют, да?
Is there a
отношений. Улучшение, не просто. Есть возможность улучшения отношений.
Что-то засомневался с ним.
So you could go to church and pray. You understand that? Что я сказал? So, yes, there's a possibility.
А вдруг она неверующая, что ей делать?
No, что?
And can I ask, under which conditions could it happen?
Say again.
Under which conditions?
Under which conditions could it possibly happen?
You know, many years ago, even before I was born, someone asked Stalin, was he satisfied with Soviet literature? And he said, these are the only writers I have. Понимаете, что он сказал?
Нравится ли советская литература? Ну, это те, кто у нас есть.
Других у меня нет.
Других
Для нас.
So, at the moment, we have only Putin and Trump.
И они оба не пьют. Так что улучшение.
Нет, Трамп нет.
Трамп? Нет, он не пьет.
Никогда.
Он только кока-колу пьет.
Вот проблема у нас.
Проблема. Так, пожалуйста, вопрос.
Wait, подождите. Потому что вопрос очень важный, конечно.
Подождите сейчас.
I will give you only one example.
Один пример я вам хочу дать.
Она не понимает.
Хорошо.
Вы понимаете по-английски, right? Okay. So I give you one example.
She is my student, she is very clever.
Very clever. Okay. And this may seem strange to you, but this is how you bring about change. When Trump went to Helsinki to meet Putin, you remember that was in July. I sent a message to the White House, and I said that if Trump wants to improve relations with Russia, and considering the reality that there, as Katrina said, there is very strong opposition in Washington to improving relations, what should Putin do to help? Because if Russia wants better relations, Putin has to help Trump. You would agree. What Putin could do is free 26 orphans. You don't know this history. Or you don't, беспризорных. You don't understand this history. So, at one time, whether you like it or not, many Americans adopted Russian беспризорных. And then there was a Kremlin ban on American adoptions. Это понятно или нет?
Закон Дима Якова назывался.
Именно так. There are 26 American families who completed the adoptions, but the children were not allowed to come to America. So, if the parents still want the children, and if the children still want to be adopted, pust Putin dot беспризорных. This would be a sensation in America. А кто против беспризорных? Понимаете? That would break the ice. That would improve the image of Putin in America. And Trump would get credit for this. It would be humane. And then we could begin serious negotiations. What did Gorbachev do? Do you young people know how Gorbachev broke the ice, opened the door? He released Sakharov from exile. Right, Victor? Remember that? What was it? December 1986. Right?
Elephants cannon.
So this was a sensation in America. It made Gorbachev popular because Sakharov was in this. So steps like this are possible, but our leaders have to think. They have to think creatively. But very simple, big impact. Большой шаг вперед. And there are other examples, but that's the easiest one.
Говоря об улучшении отношений, сейчас, секундочку, я вспомнил, сейчас на днях, буквально несколько дней тому назад, был юбилей. Юбилей, кто помнит из историков российско-американских отношений? Какого впервые выехал за пределы Советского Союза. Тегеран. Тегеранская конференция. 1943 год. Это была первая встреча президента Рузвельта и руководителя Советского Союза Сталина. Они поговорили, после этого каждая сторона устроила банкет, и Сталин произвел неизгладимое впечатление на Рузвельта, потому что во время банкета он произнес более сотни тостов. Так, пожалуйста.
Thank you for your speech very much. My name is Andrew. I'm from historical faculty, and in your speech you have highlighted that it is our role to improve the relations between the two countries, the USA and the Russian Federation. And what in particular can we do to implement that? Thank you.
I disagree to a certain extent with Steve. We have разногласия at home.
The typical American story.
I think leaders play a role, but I think you as students can also play a role. There has been a long history of student exchanges, which I believe are much fewer now because of the bad relationship. But I think I used to not believe in this, but I think as people get to know each other, it helps improve, not big steps, but it helps improve relations. There's track 2 diplomacy, do you know what I mean? Track 2 meaning citizens, or journalists, or academicians, or doctors, or scientists, meeting with each other to discuss the problems of each country. In this time of Cold War, that's better than just freezing relations. So I think students have a role to play, and whatever your passion is. Maybe in America, I have to say, there's a lot of energy behind fighting global warming. And there's a connection between nuclear problems and global warming. And there's a movement to bring together students and other activists, movements of those two. I think that could create maybe a moment when there are people protesting nuclear proliferation. So I would just say as a student, find a possibility of an exchange. We have friends, well, for example, the head of Arte, Margarita Simonyan, she lived for a year in Wisconsin, I think. I say that only because she speaks very good English. She has many friends. There are others. So exchanges and finding ways to communicate your ideas outside of the leaders, outside of the tensions.
Thank you.
Спасибо. Пожалуйста. Быстрый вопрос, быстрый ответ. Да.
Thank you. Do you think that a person as a leader of the USA or Russia can change the situation between the countries?
Say it one more time.
Do you think that a person as a leader of the USA or Russia can change the situation between our countries?
Are you sure that the leaders of both countries may change the situation?
Very quickly, I think we did see with Reagan and Gorbachev the possibility of two leaders changing the situation. But do you know this expression, deep state? It's like the permanent bureaucracy, the intelligence community, the military. I'm not sure I fully believe, but Trump, я думаю, что он одиозная фигура. No, он заложник.
Глубинного государства.
He's a заложник of many interests in the government. So I think there is a permanent government in both countries that makes change very difficult unless you have a disciplined leader with a group of people around him who know that the change they want to make, they will do. You may not appreciate Gorbachev or think he was not a great leader, but Victor is not in that. Он пришел к власти с кругом людей who knew the change they wanted to make. Lenin didn't like him.
We liked him
very much.
Yeah. But you answer that. You did it.
Well, this is a вечный вопрос. Что может сделать лидер? I think Katrina's right. The example we have in in our lifetime, not your lifetime, I guess, is Reagan and Gorbachev. Because this was a big surprise. The relationship between our two countries was very, very, very bad. And Reagan had long been a Cold War leader. He had been against nuclear relations. So why he changed his mind, there are many books about this. But we know he did change his mind. And history gave him Gorbachev, a younger leader who, for his own reasons, wanted to end the Cold War. What did they achieve? People don't remember, but Reagan's own party was opposed to him and what he did. He was almost alone in his party. But, and here's where Katrina's right, he had a commander. He had 3 or 4 people around him. And Reagan had 3 or 4 people. Right. Come on. And when they knew what Reagan wanted to do, a new relationship with Soviet Russia, they told him how to do it. They advised him. Even if Trump wanted to do that, I see no one around him who would help him do that. So we could say, I hope Trump decides to improve relations. Putin can do it. He has many commanders. He has огромная команда. Или узкая команда. Но команда есть.
И то, и другое.
И то, и другое. So if Trump decides tomorrow, I am going to end this bad relationship with Russia, who will help me? Who will help me? But it's possible, of course, because we know what Reagan and Gorbachev did in very bad circumstances.
Мне напоминает, сейчас последний вопрос будет, прежде чем вы зададите, напоминает мне историю, записанную помощником Трумэна, когда Трумэн сдавал дела после выборов 1958 года. Ему наследовал Белый дом генерал Эйзенхауэр. И Трумэн сказал своему советнику, вот я не завидую генералу Эйзенхауэру. Почему это вы не завидуете? Он победил на выборах, становится президентом. А он же, Эйзенхауэр был генерал. И Трумэн говорит, он же придет сейчас, он думает, что тут как в армии. Приказал, и все побежали выполнять. А в Белом доме не так. Вот. Последний вопрос, пожалуйста.
Извините, пожалуйста, можно тоже по-русски?
Пожалуйста.
Как вы считаете, Запад искренне хочет, чтобы Украина стала равноценным партнером западных стран и действительно искренне хочет поддерживать ее, в том числе кредитами, вооружениями, или же все-таки Украина выступает такой своеобразной чейсборд, шахматной доской во взаимоотношениях с Россией? И понимает ли президент Порошенко искренние намерения Запада в таком случае? Спасибо.
The West is really care about the prosperity of Ukrainian state, or is just using it for its own purposes.
So none of us know what these people say privately and what they say. But I have the impression that the entire game, the Americans in Washington, has been for 20 years to bring Kiev, Ukraine, into NATO. Because there is this theory, which many people say belonged to Brzezinski. You know the name Brzezinski, right? But was more widespread. Many people have. That without Ukraine, Russia is nothing. There was this idea in Washington. Without Ukraine, Russia is not a great power. It's simply a regional power at most. This is gloopest, in my opinion. But they believe this. So I think from 2000 and before, 2014, They didn't care about the people of Ukraine. They wanted to bring Ukraine away from Russia. And it has been a catastrophe for the people. We have the statistics. People live today much worse than they lived before 2014 in Ukraine. Who's told me this? Was it you told me this or somebody? Maybe Wojciech told me. We were talking the other night. There's going to be a presidential election in Ukraine in March, correct? Many of the young people who would have voted for Poroshenko have left the country. They now live in the West, in Poland and other countries. So this is a sign of what's happening in Ukraine. It's not been good for anyone. It's not been good for Russia. It's not been good for America. And it's not certainly been good for Ukraine. But this is what happens in history. People with a bad intention take actions, and the people pay the price. And that's what's happened, in my opinion, in Ukraine. It's a pointless tragedy that should never have happened. Never. And what happens now, no посмотрим.
Мы, к сожалению, должны заканчивать. Я хотел бы от вашего имени
Спасибо
поблагодарить
вам
наших
всем.
Я хотел бы предоставить слово Геннадию Аркадьевичу, который скажет сам.
Сейчас самое интересное. Дело в том, что позавчера Стивену Коэну, профессору, исполнилось 80 лет. В библиотеке вашей представлено примерно 20 наименований книг Стивена Коэна на русском и на английском языке. Вы можете с этим познакомиться и взять почитать. Но к юбилею мы издали избранные труды Стивена Коэна, которые включают самые важные, ключевые исследования его жизни. И мы сейчас хотели бы от имени ассоциации вручить несколько экземпляров книг вашему факультету, прежде всего декану факультета, профессору Белоусову, я прошу передать. Ольге мне, пожалуйста. Затем Виктору Борисовичу и Юрию Николаевичу вам. Со Стивом и Катей мы договорились, что наиболее интересные вопросы будут отмечены этим подарком с автографом автора. Потому что все другие книги уже Стив подписал. Итак, Катя, какой тебе самый интересный вопрос для тебя был?
No, I have a affection for those who want to improve things. So, женщина, Ella, you asked Devrishka. You asked how can we improve relations. So I like that question.
Как раз громко сказать, что
Вы ваши студенты.
Стив, подпиши, пожалуйста. И, Стив, какой у тебя вопрос? Вы потом подойдете, хорошо? Стив, какой для тебя был самый интересный вопрос?
Все самые интересные.
Ну, один экземпляр есть.
Это должен быть первый человек.
Это вы.
Потому что у меня впечатление, что у него есть противоречие мнений.
Вы потом тоже
подойдете. Это наша оппозиция.
Сейчас Стив будет интервью давать, после этого вам подпишут 2 экземпляра, вот они ваши книжки.
И также другие книги, кто приобрел, вы можете потом с определенной аудиторией взять автограф.
Еще минуточку, профессор Кувалдин, пожалуйста.
Наше поколение, к которому относится Стив и я, пережили холодную войну. Война была холодная, но наша жизнь была хорошая. Вот я думаю, что у вас абсолютно реальный шанс пережить эту холодную войну, чтобы у вас была хорошая жизнь, и чтобы вы жили до тех лет, до которых дожил Стив, и многое